Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. Ooh, it is early and cold in the morning. Today, we have Spain's crazy plan to conquer China in the year 1588. Of course, we have our wonderful general knowledge to tell us about this episodic adventure that Spain was about to go on. Spain, of course, I think in 1588 would be probably close to their peak of their power. Now, of course, they're very lucrative spice trade, adventuring, plus they should be owners of the Philippines, I think, at this time, probably some other places. So maybe that's a launching point. Let's jump in, shall we?
China. Spain tried to conquer China.
And by the way, it doesn't sound like a crazy thing either, because China was not what it is today.
Okay, if you're into history, you already know that this didn't happen, or at least that it didn't succeed. But
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm into history. I didn't know this happened. History is wide and broad. It's got so many things that happened.
it could have, and they were planning to do it. Throughout the 16th century, this
Philippines.
plan was proposed time after time, and everything was planned down to the very specific details. It gained even more strength from 1580 onwards, when the Spanish king essentially inherited the kingdom of Portugal,
Okay.
whose king had died without a son. An Iberian Union was created, and this gave Spain access to Portuguese domains such as their commercial outposts or feitorias across the coast of Africa.
And think about Portugal, as you can see with Africa, not really talked about Saudi Arabia, India, South Asia. There's just so many ports, and this is just the lucrative spice trade and slave trade.
The Arabian Gulf, India, and then in key places like Malacca, not to mention the direct gateway into mainland China, the port of Macau. Plus, not to mention the obvious strong Portuguese fleet at the time, their knowledge of naval and trade routes, and their close connections to a lot of the locals throughout all of these regions, namely in Japan. The invasion would be launched from the Spanish colony of the Philippines. It would advance in phases to take the coastal provinces of Guangdong and Fujian, and then the rest of the coast.
It's not like China didn't have access to gunpowder. Gunpowder was invented in China. But I think just the expansive knowledge that he's talking about with the Portuguese, as well as the Spanish Armada, and then like all the other intangibles that go along with that. Plus, Spain had a really good army. I mean, just look at the wars they participated in the 16th and 17th centuries. They had a really good army. So this comes probably, I don't see how they get defeated. I mean, it's very far away. That's the only thing that's very far away.
To Beijing and capturing the Chinese emperor Wanli, forcing him to submit to Iberian or Spanish rule. The third phase would push into the interior and begin a process of evangelizing and converting the Chinese people to Christianity.
So this is all in the name of Christianity. Of course it is. Forced conversions.
Or rather Catholicism. A fourth phase would push their domain to all surrounding areas, or at least their influence.
Okay, so third phase. Well, third phase. Hold on.
Japan, Indochina, Indonesia, but also go the opposite way, pushing west all the way to Central Asia and the frontier with the Ottoman Empire,
which was their biggest formidable threat. You know, not just Spain, Europe. was the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire really posed the you know the existential threat for Europe. Um, as we saw, Ottoman Empire, or not, well, a remnant of the previous caliphate, was in charge of Spain. That's what the Reconquista was all about. So, you know, it's not, there's not a world where this doesn't seem unlikely to blueprint, especially given, the blueprint's main objective, which is Catholicism, conversions, and so forth.
with whom they were at war with in Europe. This sounds pretty insane, right? At least I think so. Sure, the Spanish.
Not really. That's what I was about to say. Look what Spain did in Americas. Now, you know, the Aztec community, the Mayan community, the South American communities, they're China in just a different form. They have their own cultures, they have their own languages, they have their own religions. They're not Chinese, and they don't have the Silk Road, but they have their own Silk Roads with their with each other's. They're confederations of nations. They have plenty of culture in South America, Latin America. But Spain, thanks really to disease and pestilence, conquered them.
Empire was very powerful at the time, the Portuguese were very influential, and the two of them together, I think, could conceive of a naval invasion of South China. Maybe they could even hold some territory there, but all of these other phases, especially the fourth one, seems completely unreachable.
Why? Why?
And the truth is, it ended up not happening. So in this video, I want to figure out why. First, learning.
By the way, I don't think it's impossible. I think it's very possible. But there would be definitely a lot of things that had to go right for them for it to be possible. The biggest thing is, like, China's huge. So you'd have to subjugate millions. And you might not get the benefit of a pestilence helping you eliminate 80% of the population. Still could, but there's no guarantee that would happen. And even though that wasn't even the goal of Latin America, that was just happen chance biologically. So, yeah.
More details about the plan, understanding why the Spanish wanted to do it, and more importantly, why they thought that they could, and then figuring out why it didn't happen. So let's dive a little deep into this story. This is Alonso Sanchez. Well, it's not really him. There's no paintings or, of course, no pictures of how he looked at exactly, but he was a Jesuit priest, and this is how they look like, so it's pretty reasonable to think that he looked something like this. He was born in Spain. He became a priest and he traveled to the Philippines to convert the locals after the Spanish conquered the territory as a part of their colonial empire. He was part of the Society of Jesus, a religious order of the Catholic Church, commonly known as Jesuits. Which, fun fact, is the name of this incredible pastry that we have in Portugal. I eat it almost every weekend. It's like a triangle, and then you have meringue on top and some egg cream in the middle. But anyway, let's get back to the story. Okay, this is the problem of editing while you're hungry, because now I can't get back to the story. I have to go buy one. So I'm gonna take you with me.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, so we got one of them. Part of the cover is fallen off.
That does look good.
You can tell that there's like a meringue cover on the top. And
It's stiff. It's almost like a piece of pizza.
And I'm gonna try it in front of you.
Try it.
It's very good. So the origin of the name Jesuit for this is actually pretty interesting because some people say that it was named just after the shape that it has because it kind of resembles the cape that the Jesuit priests and missionaries used. Another theory says that it's named after a specific guy, a Spanish cook that moved to Portugal after cooking at a Jesuit monastery, and he would make these traditional pastries and they
I didn't know this was going to become a tasting history reaction.
became known after the Jesuit name because of that. A third theory says that it was just developed by the Jesuits themselves. We have a lot of, like church, monastery, convent cakes.
I mean, as much as Catholicism was part of the forefront of society, it almost sounds like a marketing ploy.
Pastries that were made by members of the clergy, and so this would be one of them. I'm not sure which of these is true. I guess we don't really know, so you can choose whichever you like best. Alonso led a sector of the society who believed that it was the duty of the Spanish Catholic Church to convert the millions of Chinese people to Catholicism. Many other religious orders didn't think it was a good idea, like the Dominicans or the Franciscans, and saw venturing into China a risky endeavor for their priests. Yet several figures of the Habsburg monarchy that ruled Spain found the idea pretty interesting. It was a vast land, rich with
Of course, the Habsburgs were thinking, more land.
resources and trading opportunities. Essentially, they would make a fortune if Spain was successful, and so they backed the Jesuits' plan and began pitching it to the Spanish king. But they weren't the first to do so, and they didn't really come up with this idea. The thought of conquering China and annexing it to the Spanish colonial empire was actually first presented decades earlier in 1526 by the very famous Hernán Cortés,
Yeah. Okay.
the conqueror of the Aztec Empire and
So he wanted world domination. That's what we're telling me.
much of Spanish America. After succeeding in America, he had sent a letter to King Charles V suggesting that they should sail from the Pacific coast of New Spain all the way to Indonesia, starting with the valuable Moluccas, at the time crucial in the spice trade, and then move on to conquer China. King Charles was pretty fascinated with this concept. Essentially, he had just taken over a whole continent, and so the idea of doing that again, understandably, seemed interesting. So he sent an expedition. It was led by Garcia Jofre de Loaiza. Their goal was to sail across the Pacific and colonize the Spice Islands, the Moluccas, on behalf of the Spanish crown, coming all the way from Spain and along the southern American coast. Most of them got lost on the way, and so a second expedition was sent to find them and redo the mission. It was led by Álvaro de Saavedra Cerón. This map shows us their route all the way from the Pacific coast of Mexico to the Philippines over the course of 2 years until the captain died at sea. And like they say, third time is the charm, because a third expedition was then sent, which finally reached part of the goal. This one was led by Miguel López de Legazpi, where his navigator, Andrés de Urdaneta, discovered and mapped a definitive route of travel between the Philippines and New Spain. The main goal was to access the Asian spice trade through here, but many saw this as a first step towards the conquest of China. And again, you can kind of understand their logic here a little bit. I mean, very small contingents of Spanish soldiers were able to take that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, but that is without. There's a lot there, right? I mean, they had a lot of advantages with their military, as well as they had some advantages with their technology. But like I said, it's also different societies. It's also different temperaments. It's also different biological makeups, which can either hurt or help when it comes to contact. It comes to a lot of things,
Around the gigantic Aztec and Inca empires, they were able to essentially colonize an entire continent. And so when they looked at China, they thought, maybe we could do the same here. I mean, in South and Central America, they very often had help from rival nations.
But one thing that's certain is China was more developed.
Native groups. And so I think the idea was also a little bit to do this in China too. You know, rally the locals, maybe rally people from Indonesia, from Indochina, from Japan, and with their help, take over China. After arriving in the Philippines, it's no coincidence that Manila was chosen over Cebu as the Spanish colonial capital. It was due to its closeness to Chinese trade routes.
That's interesting. Never heard about that.
Martin de Rada, a missionary and cosmographer, was sent as one of the first Western ambassadors to China in 1569. He was to assess the conditions for an invasion, but his reports went great to the cause. He stated that even if China was densely populated, its population was not warlike and depended heavily on their numbers.
Their population wasn't warlike. I guess right then and there it wasn't.
And fortifications for their defense. Hence, it would not be necessary to gather a large Spanish army to subdue them.
I was thinking that because literally one of the eras of Chinese history is called the Warring States period.
And any campaign for control should aim to be peaceful and focus instead on missionary work and conversion to Christianity. But hey, speaking of conversions, did you know that there's somebody converting your personal data into their income?
NordVPN.
This brings us to the sponsor of the person from
Always NordVPN, that's why I say that.
When knowledge with the Battle of Manila against the Chinese. Now, let's get back to the video. In 1575, following the Battle of Manila against the Chinese pirate Limahong, the Spanish Empire and the Ming Dynasty began to establish diplomatic relations, and Martin de Rada was sent to Fujian as a part of a Spanish delegation with the goal of negotiating permission for a permanent settlement in China, similar to what the Portuguese had with Macau. But that mission ultimately failed, and the Chinese refused to grant the Spanish this privilege.
Maybe they had a little bit of intuition based off of what Spain's done the last century.
After it, the governor of the Philippines, Francisco de Sande, wrote to King Philip II proposing an invasion of China. He claimed that a force of 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers would be enough, and that the Chinese people, oppressed by tyranny, would support the campaign. However, in 1577, Philip II rejected the proposal. He judged it ill-timed and instead instructed the governor to pursue friendly relations with the Ming Dynasty. But just 3 years later, something changed. In 1580, the Portuguese king died with no heir, and Philip II of Spain became king of Portugal too. An Iberian Union was created,
60 years, wow.
Which would last until 1640 and grant the Spanish a unique opportunity to try and conquer China.
Basically, through the 30 Years' War, which, just think about the wealth Spain has had access to during that period.
Again, that guy that we mentioned at the start, the Jesuit missionary, Alonso Sanchez, visited China in 1582 to confirm that the Portuguese of Macau were loyal to their Spanish king. But Sanchez was arrested by
technically, they do have a port now.
Chinese authorities, who were angered by not having been properly informed of the Union and their new trade partners. Upon his return the following year, he became convinced that only military force could ensure the spread of Christianity in China and essentially ensure Spanish control. And this might just be my interpretation of this, but it really seems like there was some type of personal experience, some personal humiliation with being arrested that led to him taking up such a strong position.
Well, even before that, when Spain was denied their port, they were inquiring about military intervention immediately after, which shows you they were like a toddler. When you tell them don't do something, they get very mad about that. But the temperament of Spain in the 16th century is about as parallel as the toddler's temperament would be.
Towards the invasion of China. He started to present the theory that the Chinese regime was mistreating Christians, and it was therefore Spain's responsibility to intervene and convert the part of the population that wasn't Catholic.
Or die.
Along with Bishop Domingo de Salazar, he came up with a plan to use the Portuguese outpost in Manila to confiscate Chinese merchant ships and use the network of Portuguese missionaries in Japan to bring in Japanese allies in their attack. He wrote a letter to King Philip stating this and arguing that China was badly defended, with a population prone to revolt against the oppressive regime. He added that 10,000 Iberian soldiers, aided by 2,000 Japanese, would be enough to
I thought it was just 6,000 last time.
start the invasion. And this time, Philip seemed to entertain the idea. It seemed appealing to expand his empire by so much land, to access China's rich resources and trade routes, and also potentially form an oriental theater of war in the at the time ongoing Ottoman-Habsburg wars of Europe. As we saw at the start of the video, the fourth phase involved doing that. So in 1588, he sanctioned the establishment of the official Junta de la Empresa de China, which I guess we could translate as the China Enterprise Board, and plans were made in detail for the conquest of China and future Spanish rule of their land. The number of needed soldiers kept growing, proposal after proposal, which I think...
I mean, you're going to have to garrison, you're going to have frontier troops, you're going to have specialized units, you're going to have navy. The problem's going to be manpower, not if you can do it.
Gives us a little bit of an idea of how unaware of China's strength Spain really was. This proposal envisioned assembling an armada under the leadership of the governor of the Philippines, consisting of 12,000 Iberian soldiers, 6,000 Visayans from the Philippines, and 5,000 Japanese recruits from Nagasaki. Jesuits valued for their knowledge of the region could assist with the expedition. They would also carry a fund of 200,000 pesos to strategically bribe Chinese locals and hire mercenaries. The campaign was to be executed from two directions, the Castilians invading through Fujian, while the Portuguese advanced through Guangdong via Macau. Jesuit priests would serve as consultants and negotiators with Chinese authorities, ensuring that the conquest prevented unnecessary violence and abuse of civilians, a theory defended by part of the Spanish church at the time. Once China was brought under Spanish control, the plan called for its systematic Christianization through the establishment of encomiendas, essentially noble estates, and Christian institutions such as hospitals, universities, and monasteries. This effort would be supported by a policy of mestizaje, encouraging intermarriage between Iberian conquistadors and Chinese women. A successful conquest would mark a monumental expansion of the Hispanic
I'm so glad this never happened.
global monarchy, transforming China into a vital base for Spanish influence across Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, just like we saw on the third phase of the plan. From there, Spanish forces could move to conquer and Christianize Indochina, Siam, Kampuchea, India,
which would eventually be conquered anyway, well, quote unquote conquered, by, some of these states weren't totally conquered, but some of these places like Indochina, Indonesia were heavily influenced by the British or French and Dutch and so forth.
Borneo, Sumatra, the Moluccas, and other regions, potentially rallying local allies against the Ottoman Empire. In 1587, preparations for the invasion started taking place in Manila. They started building stockpiles of supplies, weapons, ships. Soldiers were being organized to move into the invasion. That same year, coincidentally, a Japanese delegation from Irado, led by Konishi Yukinaga, a Japanese Christian and admiral, who we can see in this painting, arrived in Manila and offered 6,000 soldiers and pledged all the
Obviously, Japan and China's not had the best relations.
people and soldiers that Spain asked to join any campaign against China. Everything seemed ready at this time, and most surprisingly, it kind of seemed like they could do it. When we take a closer look, it was a viable plan with moderate goals, at least at the start, and a step-by-step set of objectives. So why didn't it happen? Oddly enough, the Catholic Church, even though one of the main goals here was the conversion of millions of Chinese people to Christianity. Part of the church, and even part of the Jesuits, saw this plan of invading China as an unjustified use of
What about all the people in America that died? Was that justified? What about all the people in the Philippines that died? Was that justified? What about all the people that died in Africa? Was that justified? What about all the people everywhere in the world? Was that justified? This is where we draw the line.
violence against non-Christians.
That's crazy.
Portuguese Jesuits were particularly not on board.
That's contradictory rules. Don't like them. I like absolute rules. Feel one way, about one society, please feel the same way about the other society. Otherwise, your your goggles for humanity are blurry.
They didn't want to jeopardize their existing relationship with China.
That's why it's see, that's what I'm telling you. That first line was bullshit. It's all about commerce, and Spain, a lot of the coffers were declining for the silver mines, gold mines in South America, North America at the time. Really, they wanted to hedge their bets against that with a potential East relationship, and that could possibly, they could flounder everything and they could fall if they, were to, somehow end up without all the beautiful mining resources that they've had over the last century in South America, because that fueled their economy and their military and their conquests. So that's the reason.
Over Spain's ambition. At the same time, other religious orders protested to the king, the Dominicans and the Franciscans.
But what was just spoke about was about the religious aspect. That's the optics. But when you dig deeper, it's always greed, usually.
Stating that they had their own projects to convert China peacefully, and this attempted conquest would make it impossible. Ultimately, with so many obstacles and objections, the interest of the Spanish king faded away, and so the project was archived. The new governor of the Philippines was once again given strict instructions not to enter a conflict with China and instead seek a policy of appeasement and friendship with the Ming. By 1640, Portugal also regained its independence, and so a key element in the Spanish plan was removed.
Macau.
Some others tried to revive the idea in the coming decades, even once replacing China with Japan as the target of the invasion, but
worst option.
Never successfully. And so the crazy Spanish plan to invade China, which actually seemed to not have been that crazy after all, was abandoned and never came to be. And it's crazy to think that this was a real possibility. I mean, how different would the world be if they had tried? And most of all,
like I said, it really just comes down to the effort the Chinese push back, because they do not have a manpower advantage. The Spanish does not. Also depends about the biological element. Does that even affect the Chinese population with the contact? Does it affect the Spanish population with the contact? What does the other countries do? What about Europe? They're about to enter the 30 Years' War, so this would have to be a sweeping, like, it would be a cat and mouse game, because they would have to pull resources back to Europe in this same hypothetical if they were to attack 1588, because 20 years later, Netherlands are on fire. The Germany's on fire. Spain is kind of inherently pulled in because of the HRE. So, I just don't see it. It would have had to happen 50 years earlier. It would have had to happen swiftly. It would have had to happen biologically. So many other things.
If they had succeeded. China ended up never being directly colonized by the Europeans. Only Hong Kong and Macau, plus some other local city and port concessions. And maybe this is a sign that the Spanish would have been ultimately unsuccessful. I mean, if the British didn't invade it, and they invaded everyone at the time, there must have been a good reason not to.
Well, yeah, British had Hong Kong, and they had another place. I forget where they also had. I think they did. British had India, the crown jewel of the empire. I mean, it's not like the British probably would have eventually tried to do it too. Anyway, guys, what do you think? Do you think it would have been possible? Let me know why or why not. Appreciate you guys being here. It is still cold in my house. Thank you. Peace out. Bye-bye.